BibleWorm, BibleWorm, reading the Bible, it's BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm. I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, here every week with my friend Dr. Bobby Williamson. We are Bible scholars and people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian. There's nothing we love like exploring and wondering at the biblical text, and we're so glad you're here to think and wrestle with us. This week we read Mark chapter 8:22 through chapter 9:9. We witness Peter's very human struggle to wrap his head around what Jesus is trying to tell him, as he comes so close and yet remains so far from understanding. We think about what it means to live lives of integrity and the risks that may pose to our physical comfort and safety. We long for the fantasy world of the mountain, where you're above the fray and your whites are always Oxy-Clean clean. Thanks for tuning in. Hi, Bobby.
Hey, Amy, how are you this week?
I think I just said ahoy.
Ahoy!
I didn't mean to.
Matey.
Ahoy!
Ahoy! How are you this week?
Oh my god! Wow! I don't even think Jesus is in a boat this week. That would have been a better intro for when Jesus.
It would have
Jesus
been. Yeah, he just got off a boat.
He did.
In the story previous, but
which we don't read.
Yeah.
So this week we are in Mark chapter 8. The Narrative Lectionary starts at verse 27.
Yes.
And goes into chapter 9, verse 9.
Right.
And Bobby also has put in a special request to back up a little and start at verse 22.
So a lot of scholars of Mark, when they look at the way the text fits together, they think that the first major section of Mark ends at 8:21, and then the second major section of Mark begins at 8:22 and goes through Mark 10:52 is the second chunk, and then 11:1 through the end is the third. And so I just thought, the story that's told in Mark 8:22 is an interesting story, and a lot of scholars think it frames the action of the rest of that middle section. So I thought we could start there, and I appreciate your humoring me about that.
It was only a couple extra verses, so,
yeah.
We can do that. We can do a couple extra verses.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are in chapter 8, verse 22. They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to see him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village, and when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hand on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then he sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village."
So this story is interesting in that, so Jesus has to do this miracle twice. And the first time he does the miracle, the man, so initially we're led to believe that he's completely blind, and then Jesus cures him once, and now he can see, but he doesn't see very well. And I don't know exactly what it means that people look like trees walking around, but clearly they're not supposed to look like trees.
Right, something's not quite, there's an improvement, but it's not quite right.
He is now seeing things, but he is not seeing the world the way the world presents itself to him. Yeah. And so Jesus heals him again, and then now he can see clearly.
When I first read this, I read it as something's off.
Yeah.
Something is off that wasn't off before. Do you read it as there's something not connecting properly, or I don't know, how do you?
Yeah, I think that's right. And, I think this story will make more sense maybe as we go along, but I think that's absolutely right, is there's something amiss with this healing. Mm-hmm. And, at this point, to me, it's just it's a curiosity about this text that this story is told this way.
Well, I like that, starting our section with a curiosity.
Yeah,
not
exactly.
Sort of resolving that.
Yeah.
I know the trees might be just sort of an example of a way to say that, they're big, blurry, tall things. But I like the idea of the people actually looking like trees. Okay.
Yeah, what are those? Are they called the Ents or whatever it is in the Lord of the Rings that are like those big tree creatures?
Oh, I don't know.
And they walk around and they're like, "Hey, I will save the world."
I wonder if that's where this came. If Lord of the Rings got that from here.
It's possible, yeah. I don't know, Tolkien. I read the other day that Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings while he was procrastinating from his academic work.
That's amazing.
And I was like, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. Williamson, BibleWorm. I don't know. I don't think I come out on top in that one.
Oh, it's early. It's early in your run. We'll see.
It's true, yeah. I mean, and, BibleWorm is at least as good as some of those freaking Hobbit songs that they sing when they're, like, in the pub or whatever. Whoo. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying.
Alrighty, should we go on?
Let's do it.
Okay. We are picking up in verse 27. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him.
So this is obviously a pivotal moment in the gospel, right? All this whole time, the question has kind of been out there, like, are the disciples ever going to figure out who Jesus is? Like, we were told in verse 1, and then we were told again at the baptism, but the disciples haven't known this whole time. And, as a reader, you're kind of rooting for them to, like, figure it out. And here is the telling of how they finally got there. You are the Messiah.
What do you think Peter means by Messiah? Like the Hebrew Bible understanding of Messiah? Meaning like you are the chosen one of God who will lead the people? Or do you think there's more to it? Like, do you think the sense of Messiah at that time had a different quality about it?
I mean, so I think that what's about to happen is that the question that's going to be worked out in the rest of the gospel in some way is like, what do we mean when we say Messiah? And Peter and Jesus have different ideas about what that means. I mean, my reading is that Peter's kind of fitting in his understanding of Messiah to kind of the common understanding of what the Messiah was supposed to be in his time. What do you think about that?
Oh, well, no, I mean, I think that seems like a reasonable conclusion to me, or a reasonable hypothesis. It just sort of underscores that even though Peter says, "You are the Messiah," and it's like in our heads we go, ding, 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 he got it, that doesn't necessarily mean that he totally gets it.
No, he definitely does not totally get it. Yeah.
Right. I think it is very interesting for Jesus to ask his disciples. Jesus is a busy man. Like, he has a lot on his plate.
He does, yeah.
He has a full schedule.
Yeah.
He has a lot of people asking things of him that were not on his to-do list.
Yeah.
Why does he... I think it's so interesting that he would sort of pause and say, who do people think I am? Like, what do people think of me? And what do you think of me? Like, you don't have time for that, Jesus. Have you ever heard the phrase, Bobby, what other people think of you is none of your business?
No.
You haven't. It's like it's supposed to be an encouraging phrase, like, don't be so worried about other people's opinions.
I've definitely heard don't worry about what other people think of you, but the phrasing, like, it's none of your business, is
what
kind of
other people think of you is none of your business.
That's kind of an interesting phrasing, yeah.
You don't need to worry about it. That's their problem. Whatever people say about you is their problem. But Jesus wants to know, and I'm assuming Jesus has a reason for wanting to know, because he is a busy man.
I mean, my first thought is that Jesus actually doesn't care that much what other people think. And so this sort of like, I mean, he's not that interested in that some people think he's John the Baptist, some people think he's Elijah, and some people think he's a prophet. He's like, okay, fine. But in my mind, what do you think? Who do you say that I am? That's the key. And, I just have read that as these are Jesus's like closest followers, and he is trying to get them to understand something that they have not understood. He hasn't wanted to give it away to them. Like, he keeps telling people not to tell anybody who he is. Nobody's figured it out except the demons so far in the gospel.
Those demons.
And it's important for whatever reason for Jesus that his disciples come to understand who he is without Jesus having to tell
they need
them.
to figure it out.
But he needs to know that they know so he can get on with the next part, right? Like, so working out the details of what that means. So that's the way I've read it, is he's checking in, like, have you got it yet? And Peter's like, yep, we got it. And then that initiates like phase 2, you know?
Yeah, phase 2 is a little intense.
Phase 2 is super intense.
Whoa.
Yeah. Super intense. Yeah.
Okay, so we are in verse 31.
Yeah.
Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Whoa.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of, I mean, for you, kind of as a reader, it seems like a lot of information all of a sudden. And you just, I try to put myself in Peter's place, and this whole time he's been struggling with who is Jesus is. He finally gets it. And you might expect that there's a party or way to go, Peter, good on you, you know? And instead Jesus says, hey, okay, now that you understand I'm the Messiah, let me tell you what that means. I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be killed. I'm going to rise from the dead. In my mind, that is not at all what Peter thought was about to happen.
I mean, if Peter had some kind of Hebrew Bible informed sense of what Messiah meant, that is certainly not what you are expecting. You are expecting a Messiah who has a sort of traditional, I guess, for lack of a better word, sense of strength and power and ability to lead and protect in a pretty concrete way.
Yeah.
So the idea that Messiah is going to be, rejected by all these people in power in lesser authority roles than the Messiah would be in, and then would be killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not what one might have expected from a Messiah.
Yeah, and so Peter, I mean, he finally got there, and then the whole thing immediately gets flipped on its head.
What do you think Peter's rebuke looked like?
I'm reading the Common English Bible. Peter took hold of Jesus and, scolding him, began to correct him. So for me, so there's a taking hold, so there's a physical act.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Scolding to me is always finger wagging, no. And then correcting Jesus, whom
this is what's going to happen instead. Really,
yeah.
Peter.
And Peter just said, "You're the Messiah," and so he knows who he's talking to.
Yeah.
He's so invested in his own understanding of what messiahship looks like that he's willing to correct the person who he just confessed was the Messiah.
I know this will be shocking to you, but the first time I read this text, I wasn't thinking anything about Peter trying to assert his sense of Messiah or, trying to sort of somehow launch his authority over Jesus's. I was thinking Peter is a human and has developed a sense of love and care for Jesus.
Yeah.
And now Jesus is so I'm actually going to be killed and rejected by everybody.
Yeah.
And when someone you care about says that, I feel like the first thing most people would say is don't talk like that. No, that's not going to happen. Stop. Don't go down that road. And so when Jesus goes on to say, you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things, that's how I interpret that. You don't want this to happen because in the realm of human things, this is a really bad outcome.
Yeah, I love that reading because it gives Peter back, my reading of it sort of we're having an intellectual debate about messiahship.
Yeah.
Your reading is these guys love each other and you don't want to contemplate these things.
Yeah.
I don't know that those have to be necessarily pulled apart, but I really love what you are adding to that interpretation, the emotional component.
I mean, what else would the human things, how do you read the human things, divine things, and human things?
So what I read with human things is that this kind of Peter has an understanding of the role of the Messiah that involves the restoration of the kingdom and Jesus being in a position of power and Peter being Jesus' right-hand man. Some of this is some of the things that the disciples are going to struggle with in the next couple of chapters. So I'm a little bit reading ahead.
So I can see I think in your reading, if you said, "Get behind me, Satan," like, what about this? What about Peter's rebuke is evil, right? Or a thing of Satan. And so I do struggle some if I want to do this sort of like empathetic, loving read of Peter. How do we all of a sudden get behind me, Satan?
Yeah.
And the best I can come up with is again like a very human reading of Jesus, that like Jesus doesn't want that to happen either.
Yeah.
And like he can't start thinking about that. Like this this is what's going to happen. And it doesn't help me for you to tell me to stop and don't talk about it and don't, know, like it's just is.
I think that's exactly right. And so Peter represents a temptation to Jesus.
Yes, a temptation.
To do something different. Mm-hmm. And I actually think that your reading there fits with either where you were headed or where I was headed. So Peter's temptation is about, like, I love you and I don't want this to happen to you. And that it distracts Jesus from his mission. Or my reading of, like, wouldn't you rather just, like, become a powerful king? Mm-hmm. And that also
is
pulls
preferable
Jesus away.
To what Jesus is describing, yes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, to me, it's reasonable to think all of that kind of fits together as, like, different, refractions of the gem or whatever you want to say, like, parts of the whole.
Yeah.
So this brings me back to the double healing of the blind man, which we had read previously. And, basically what we said when we read it just a minute ago was like, this is a weird story. The way that some people, and I'm persuaded by this, is that story has been placed right where it is as kind of a metaphorical introduction to this next section of the gospel, which we are now into. And that is the blind man is representative of the disciples. So up until this moment in the text, the disciples have not been able to see who Jesus is in the way that the blind man has been unable to see. Mm-hmm. And then this moment where Peter says, "You are the Messiah," that is, his eyes have been opened.
But partially.
But then very quickly we realize that he is not seeing the Messiah correctly. He's not seeing Jesus. Instead of seeing Jesus the person, he's seeing Jesus the tree walking around, right? Instead of seeing Jesus the suffering Messiah, he's seeing Jesus the traditional Messiah that he's heard of, who's going to be, the great powerful figure. And so the disciples now are, in that sense, are partially healed, but they can't get it. They are unable to comprehend the actual meaning that Jesus is the Messiah.
Verse 34. He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life?"
I mean, the cross, like, has been very much, like, I don't know, like, sanitized, beautified in the Christian tradition, especially in Protestant traditions like my own, where, we have an empty cross as the symbol. Right. But, I mean, the cross was a gruesome instrument of execution.
Horrific.
Deployed by the Romans to punish the worst offenders, like treasonous people, in ways that were painful and publicly humiliating. To say, look what happened to that person, we'll do it to you too.
Yeah.
So this is this is a shocking thing to say. Take up your cross, right? Your instrument of state-sanctioned, torturous execution.
This got, like, super intense.
It did.
Mark part 2 is no joke.
So this, it's interesting when you think about, like, what is this gospel trying to do, like, in terms of, like, being evangelical or getting people to follow Jesus? Like, it is not really very good at it. You know what I mean? Like, it's recognizing that this lifestyle to which it is inviting you is a difficult one that not many people are going to actually be able to do or want to do.
Well, and I think that the next verse in there, that's the best case that can be made for why you would want to do that.
Yeah, right? Go ahead.
So this is verse 35. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the gospel will save it.
What do you take that to mean?
Well, I think Mark's kind of playing fast and loose with the word life here, or what do we mean by life? Do we mean having a functioning body?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you mean having a functioning body, then you ought not follow Jesus. Jesus has just told you that that's not it's not a path to safety.
I mean, one way of interpreting this is you can protect your own life and live according to the economics and the politics of the empire, which provides safety and security for some people at the expense of others. Like, you can do that if you want to, but that's not a real life. Or you can be a part of the bringing about of the kingdom of God on earth, which in some way has in mind like the community that's envisioned in Deuteronomy, a covenanted community of equitable distribution. And so you can be a part of that if you want to, but there's a cost to it. And the cost is both in terms of like giving up some of your own privilege, but there's also a cost in terms of like the empire like kind of likes being the empire. And so if what you're talking about is like bringing about this more equitable community, like you're going to incur the wrath of the empire.
Yeah, and how you convince people of that. Well, Jesus has some convincing words coming up.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. And he said to them, Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see that the kingdom of God has come with power. Okay, does Jesus not just pretty much flat out say here, like, you can do what you want, but I'm going to tell God on you?
Yeah, so there's been a sense in Mark that sort of what you put into the world, like that's what God's going to give back to you.
Yeah.
And so here, like, if you're ashamed of me, like, I'll be ashamed of you. Anything else about that little section that we need to say? I don't have much.
I want to get to what I have affectionately termed the Oxy-Clean commercial.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, chapter 9, verse 2. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. That's where I got the Oxy-Clean.
Yeah, no, that's good.
And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus.
Like, to me, like, what this reminds me of is, in the Star Wars films, when Obi-Wan Kenobi dies, or when Yoda dies, or when Anakin dies, and then, they show up places and they're kind of light and shimmery, and they're like, let me give you some wisdom from the beyond,
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, that's what's happening here. And then Jesus is able to participate in that realm, even though he is yet still alive. And so, in my mind, Elijah and Moses, Elijah the great prophet, Moses the great lawgiver, Jesus the new guy, and in my reading is trying to say, like, Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets.
Mm-hmm.
You look suspicious.
No, I think the word fulfillment feels hard for me.
He's continuous with?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, he's in the lineage of Moses and Elijah. I wonder too about the fact that this is coming relatively shortly after this passage where Jesus is trying to get these people-oriented people, right? To understand that, like, something's going to go down here that doesn't make sense to you right now. And it is hard for Jesus to get people on earth, including his disciples, to hear what he's saying at this point, especially in terms of like the danger to their lives if they follow him, and the fact that, you know, his own life is going to end in the way it is. And we don't even have details on it yet, but it already sounds pretty bad.
Yeah.
And so I almost see it like, so he's got a couple pals from like the other realm, you know, who maybe can get it a little better, like a different support system, because his Earth friends are a little not too quick on the uptake with this.
Yeah. No, I like that, the support system from back home. Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. And then, you know, in verse 7, the voice speaks from the cloud. This is my son whom I dearly love. Listen to him. Mm-hmm. And if you remember in Mark's version of the baptism, the voice from heaven didn't speak to everyone. It spoke directly to Jesus. You are my son.
That's right.
So here we have a heavenly voice confirming that Jesus is who he says he is. And now the disciples actually have access to that. Mm-hmm. And then the command comes, listen to him. Like when he's telling you about what's going to happen, like, yes, that's what's going to happen. That's what needs to happen. Like, listen to him, obey him.
My favorite thing about this part is Peter's suggestion to make tents.
What do you take from that?
I take from that, Peter is like, oh crap. Like, we have to do something. Like, Jesus brought us up here, but what are we supposed to do? Like, Jesus is just talking with Elijah and Moses. They're not telling us anything. Like, I know I'm going to be a good host and make you a little dwelling place. Yeah. And you can all three have them and be very happy here. Like, I just see it as Peter, like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do, but I know I'm supposed to do something. Yeah. So it's like bringing out a tray of cookies. Like, let's, you know. Yeah. Because he didn't know what to say because they were terrified.
Yeah, I love that in verse 6. He said this in the CEB because he didn't know how to respond, for the three of them were terrified. So yeah, he's so freaked out that he's like,
just trying to think of what would a good host do here? I know.
Yeah, I mean, we're on a mountaintop. Like, I don't know, Dave's probably getting along.
Would you guys like some tents?
Yeah, let's build a tent, and you can each have one. And there's not even making them bunk together, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, you could have privacy. You could, like, spend time. Whatever you want.
Yeah, sweet Peter. Like,
I love it.
Peter tries hard.
Yeah,
he does.
Okay.
People give Peter a hard time for this, and you know,
for this part.
Yeah,
because he doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people read this, and I mean, I'm one of them. Sometimes, some days, it depends on my mood.
And I'm one of them.
People will say, Peter's like building dwelling places or tents was an attempt to keep everybody up on the mountain. Like we're having this mountaintop experience. Moses is here, Elijah is here, Jesus is here. Like, this is awesome. Like, let's just stay here. And I mean, I don't know. I go back and forth between whether that's a good reading or an over reading of the text. But if you just allow that's a possible reading. Yeah. Then the interpretation that comes to me is something like, like there's a temptation of the church or of people to put roots down, like up on the mountain above the fray. Yeah. Because we're comfortable there. We want to linger in this kind of ecstatic moment. But the real stuff happens down, at the bottom of the mountain where the people are and where there's danger. And so Jesus has been saying this whole time, like, we're going to have to go down and we're going to go through some stuff. And so Peter is saying, like, but we could just stay up here where everything's nice. And so people give Peter a hard time for that, for wanting to stay up on the mountain and never come back down from his mountaintop experience.
I can definitely see that. I have the question in my mind about, like, well, then what about the fact that this whole thing, like, it wasn't Peter's idea that this all was going to happen on the mountaintop? Why didn't Elijah and Moses present themselves in the middle of the fray? Yeah. Which is never what happens.
No. I mean, mountaintops are significant in the Bible, but you're never supposed to stay on a mountain. Like sometimes you have to go to a mountain, but you're never supposed to stay there. Can you remind us of some of the important mountaintop things?
There's Sinai. Sinai was important.
There is, right? The giving of the law.
Of the law. Yeah, that was the thing that came to mind in part because there's a reference here to a cloud that descends over the mountain. Right before the voice of God comes. And that's familiar to me. sort of narrative of like God's presence coming in sort of a cloud descending on a mountain or a tabernacle or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Elijah also has a mountaintop experience, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
Also on Sinai, although it's called Horeb in that text, in 1 Kings 19, where he has escaped Jezebel, who's killing all the prophets, and he makes his way to Horeb and hides in the cave, and then God comes and speaks to him in a still small voice.
That's right.
And what God says to him there is, you got to go back where you came from. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can't stay on. You got to go to the mountains sometimes.
Stay on the mountain. Yeah.
The mountains are a place where you can communicate with God more directly, but you can't stay there. Got to go. Yep.
Yeah, those are nice ties. All right, Bobby, we've come to our ending question. As modern folks who are parts of religious communities or to whom this text is important, how do you sit with this text today? What do you pull from it? How do you live with it?
The thing that's occurring to me first is like this whole metaphor of the blind person who is not able to see clearly, and then that gets mapped on to Peter, who confesses Jesus as the Messiah, but he doesn't understand what that means. And to me, that Peter figure is in the position of the church today, like people of Christian faith, who many times we are able to confess that Jesus is the Messiah, but when we confess that, as Peter did, we don't really understand what that means. We're not prepared to take that on in the way that Jesus means it. And so when Jesus comes back at Peter and says, no, look, like you really need to understand what you're saying here, which is like, you're going to pick up your instrument of execution and you're going to go into the world carrying that around with you. And you're going to have to give up your life, which you value because it's not the real life that matters. You're gonna have to give that up to bring about another kind of world. And my experience, in myself, right, in the churches, the communities that I belong to, like the gospel has lost that edge oftentimes. Like it's in contrast to life as usual. And so I worry that I and we have started to be like Peter, who, simultaneously say Jesus Christ is Messiah and also live in the world, in ways that are comfortable. So I think this text is a challenge to Christians especially, but maybe to all of us, to think about the fact that to bring about a life contrary to the values of the empire and in keeping with the values, the covenanted values of life that God envisions both in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament, like this requires giving up some things. I think the same thing in that one interpretation I was suggesting about Peter and the building of the tabernacles, that there is comfort in sort of floating high above the fray, so to speak, and getting so like invested just in the theory of what the gospel means, that we try to build our tabernacles on the mountains rather than like being down where the real stuff is happening and in places that might actually be uncomfortable or even dangerous, where the church seems like Jesus seems to be saying that's where the people need to be. And many of us, myself included, might rather just hang out, like build a little tabernacle on the mountaintop and stay up there. What do you see when you read this text?
I think that the part of the text that most resonates for me is similar. It's just I read it without without Christian theology, without an afterlife in it.
Yeah, sure.
But is this idea that it is easy to go through life and just sort of have like, well, you do this and then you do this and you do this. Like this is the path to success, right? You're just checking things off down the list, and success is defined by whatever, your parents and your society and the modern empire, and maybe it has to do with having a certain amount of money, maybe it has to do with being married, maybe it has to do with whatever. Like there are things that people give you to do and you do them. And there's a certain amount of satisfaction in checking things off the list. And there's a certain amount of like bodily comfort that comes with some of those things. But to really, as I sort of round this middle-age bend here, to really sort of think about who put the things on my list that I'm checking off?
Yeah.
And do I truly, like, is it really sort of a life of integrity for me, or is it not? And to sort of figure out, even if this is it, like, this is the life and this is the life you get, but to still be able to say, like, there are things that you would rather lose your physical life because it wasn't meaningful for you to continue it on this particular path you were on anyway.
Yeah.
Do you know what we're reading next week?
Yeah, next week is Mark. Oh, this is really short. Mark 9, 30 to 37.
Well, I'll talk to you next week.
All right, I'll see you then.
All right, y'all take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of BibleWorm. This week's intro was sung by Tom Harris, pastor of Govans Presbyterian Church in Baltimore, Maryland. If you would like to be featured, just record yourself or your Sunday school class singing the intro and send it to us at BibleWormPodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.